Prince Harry is reportedly planning another trip to the UK. Joining us now for all the royal news is Andrew Eborn, UK barrister and broadcaster. Andrew Eborn, lovely to see you again.
It's always a pleasure. I hope you had a great break.
I absolutely did. But it is wonderful to be back with you and with all of the amazing viewers. But we have a lot to cover when it comes to royal news. Prince Harry, of course, dominating the headlines. He's just wrapped up his trip to the UK and he's already planning another trip with Meghan, Archie and Lilibet after his recent visit, of course. But according to New Idea, Prince William remains firmly opposed to this, and Harry is said to be expecting a pretty hostile reaction. What are the details?
Well, it is interesting, as you say. He's just finished this 5-day trip, and Buckingham Palace confirmed that they did meet, something I've been campaigning for. King Charles obviously listened to me. He met with Queen Camilla, Harry, Meghan, and also the two children. They met at Highgrove House, which was wonderful. And this was the first time that Charles had seen his grandchildren in 4 years. Anybody who's a grandfather or indeed a father and hasn't seen their children for that length of time would obviously be missing them, in the same way as we missed you during the summer break. What they did, they met Charles, basically it was after a private meeting, this is what it was, and it was the Daily Mail who said he was sort of getting ready for this 1 year to go about the Invictus Games. He made a 1.5-hour drive from the National Exhibition Centre in Birmingham to his father's Highgrove estate. He arrived there about 3:30, 4 o'clock, but it was basically a private luncheon. This is how they managed to sneak them in so people didn't know. Chanel was holding a private luncheon there, and this was the perfect cover because cars could arrive and people weren't quite sure who was in the car. Well, I can tell you that in one of those cars was the four of them, Harry, Meghan and the two children. So indeed, now we've got that reconciliation. They're looking at this wonderful Christmas get together, and I hope it does happen. But you're right, the Shakespearean tragedy, the drama, if you like, continues, because Prince William is, whilst he's understanding that Charles wants to have a reunion with Harry, William himself is not too keen on it. In fact, he was on July the 7th, which was my birthday. William was not too far away from Harry. What they did, he made no attempt, as far as I know, to get together with him. They have basically been estranged since Spare came out in 2023, where, as you remember, there was all sorts of claims about his brother, and the Queen's mantra, copied from Disraeli all those years ago, was never complain, never explain. Well, that went out the window with Spare and various other interviews in the press. But this is what happens. He disclosed, you might remember, about the alleged physical altercation that they had, about apparently comments that William made about Meghan, saying she was difficult, rude and abrasive. Heaven forbid I work on that sort of basis. Harry said in that memoir in Spain, he said it happened so very fast. He grabbed me by the collar, ripping my necklace, and he knocked me to the floor. Well, extraordinary stuff, extraordinary allegations, but it's a very frosty relationship still between William and Harry.
Family, sit down for this one, because what just happened at Highgrove tells you more about the state of this family than 100 palace statements ever could. Here's the headline fact, confirmed by the palace itself, not leaked, not guessed at. Charles, Camilla, Harry, Meghan and both children were together privately at Highgrove House. And I want you to actually picture how that meeting had to happen, because the mechanics of it are the real story today. Harry had just finished 5 days on the ground in the UK, built around the 1 year to go milestone for the Invictus Games. Instead of heading straight home after that kind of week, he made an 1.5-hour drive out to his father's estate late in the afternoon. And the meeting itself didn't happen out in the open. It happened folded into a private lunch Camilla was already hosting that day, which meant cars were moving in and out of that estate all afternoon, and nobody outside the immediate family had any real way of knowing who was in which vehicle. Let that sit for a second, squaddies. That is not a spontaneous family lunch. That is a logistics operation. A king cannot simply invite his son and grandchildren over for the afternoon without building a cover story around it first. And the fact that this level of planning was necessary tells you everything about the environment this family is actually operating in. an environment the tabloid machine built brick by brick over the last 5 years. And here's the number that should stop you cold. By most credible accounts, this was the first time King Charles had seen his grandchildren in 4 years. 4 years, family, say it out loud. Whatever corner of this story you land on, whatever you think about who owes who an apology, a grandfather going 4 years without seeing his grandchildren is not a footnote. It's the human cost sitting underneath every headline the Royal Rota has ever written about this family. And it's the part they never ever want to dwell on, because it doesn't fit the ungrateful Sussex's script they've been selling since 2020. Now, here's where this story turns, because just as this door creaks open, there's reporting suggesting one person is already leaning against it to keep it shut. Prince William. According to reporting that circulated since the Highgrove visit, William remains firmly unenthusiastic, to put it generously, about a Christmas reunion, and Harry is reportedly bracing for a frosty reaction if that visit actually goes ahead. Now, I want to be fair here, because that's what we do on this channel. The framing on this hasn't been William is trying to override his father. It's been softer than that. That William understands why Charles wants this, even if he isn't personally on board. That's a real distinction, and it matters. But understanding something and supporting it are two completely different postures, derangers. And the reporting lands pretty clearly on the side of not keen rather than on board. There's a detail in the timeline that I think deserves way more attention than it's gotten. July 7th, William's own birthday, Harry was reportedly in relatively close physical proximity to his brother, and as far as anyone can tell, nothing happened. No call, no message, no gesture in either direction. Two brothers, physically not far apart, and total silence, by choice. Now, let's Steelman this properly, because I'm not interested in strawmanning William just because it's satisfying. Estranged siblings do not owe each other spontaneous reconciliation because geography happened to put them in the same postcode for an afternoon. Grief, betrayal, years of accumulated hurt, none of that dissolves because two people were briefly close together. If William isn't ready for a relationship with his brother, he isn't ready. Nobody, including me, gets to dictate somebody else's healing timeline. That's a real human defensible position. Here's where the Steelman runs out of road, though, family. This isn't a quiet, private grievance anymore. It's being reported, it's being discussed, it's apparently being fed into press channels in ways that shape public opinion, before Harry has so much as confirmed a flight. And that's a completely different animal from simply keeping your distance. If William wants distance, he's entitled to it. What he is not entitled to do, if these reports hold up, is quietly work against a Christmas reunion his own father is reportedly hoping for, while the narrative around it gets managed through friendly tabloid channels instead of an actual conversation between two brothers. Because let's be honest about where this rift actually started, because context matters enormously here. This didn't begin with a Christmas guest list. It began back in 2023, when Spare tore up the old royal doctrine of never complain, never explain. In his own memoir, Harry described a physical altercation with William, an allegation that his brother grabbed him by the collar, tore a necklace from his neck, and knocked him to the floor, reportedly following comments William had made, calling Meghan difficult, rude, and abrasive. I want to be precise here, squaddies, because precision is what separates us from the tabloid machine. These are not court-verified facts. They are allegations made by Harry under his own name, in his own published words, not anonymous palace whispers, not a source close to the family. And that distinction is exactly why estranged isn't dramatic language in this story. its accurate, plain description. So when we talk about William reportedly resisting a Christmas reunion, we are not talking about a minor scheduling disagreement between brothers. We are talking about an alleged physical altercation, years of coordinated press warfare, and a memoir that put private family history into print for the entire world to read. Which is exactly what makes what Charles did at Highgrove so remarkable. He did not wait for his sons to sort out their differences first. He made room for his grandchildren anyway. And that Highgrove secrecy detail keeps nagging at me, family, because I don't think it's gotten the weight it deserves. A king had to smuggle a visit with his own grandchildren behind his wife's lunch party. Cars coming and going, nobody sure who's inside them. That is not a family enjoying an easy, relaxed afternoon together. That is a family that has learned, through painful experience, that the moment the press catches wind of a Harry-Charles meeting before it happens, it stops being a family moment and becomes a full-blown media circus. Doorstepping, helicopters, sources, briefing against each other in real time. So ask yourself the obvious question. Who actually benefits from a family having to operate like this? Not Charles, who reportedly just wants to see his grandchildren. Not Harry, who drove 90 minutes out of his way at the tail end of a 5-day work trip to make it happen. The only people who benefit from that kind of secrecy are the ones who'd use advance notice to shape the story before it's even happened. That tells you something real about the environment this reconciliation is trying to survive inside. One where a father can't casually invite his son to lunch, where a grandfather has to route his own hospitality around when the cameras are looking the other way. That's not family life, squaddies. That's crisis management wearing a Sunday roast as a disguise. Now, let's go back to July 7th, because I think that detail is the whole story in miniature. William, reportedly near Harry on his own birthday, made no move to reach out. Not a call, not a text, nothing anyone's aware of. And again, people are allowed to protect their peace. If William has decided he needs distance to process years of what he sees as betrayal, the memoir, the documentary series, the interviews, that is entirely his right, as a human being, and not just as a future king. Nobody gets to tell another person when they're required to forgive. But here's the tension I want to leave with you. Reportedly opposing a Christmas reunion is a fundamentally different act from simply keeping your own distance. "I'm not ready for a relationship with my brother," is one sentence. "I don't think my father should get to see his grandchildren at Christmas," is an entirely different sentence. Conflating those two is exactly the kind of framing that has let William avoid real scrutiny for years, while Harry and Meghan absorb the full weight of the difficult family member narrative over and over again. And I want to name something plainly, because it needs saying every single time this story resurfaces. Notice how little Meghan actually shows up in the substance of this dispute, and how much she gets used as its emotional shorthand. The alleged 2019 altercation was reportedly triggered by comments William made calling Meghan difficult, not by anything Meghan herself did in that room. She wasn't even there. She became the trigger for a fight that was really about two brothers, their father, and control over the family narrative. And 6 years later, she's still functioning as the go-to explanation for why this family can't share a postcode without a decoy lunch party. That's the pattern I need this community to see clearly, because it repeats every single time. Meghan didn't create the estrangement between William and Harry. She became the convenient explanation for it. A woman blamed for tension that, by every account we have, predates her arrival in this family entirely. Here's where I land, squaddies, and I think it's the most important point in this entire story. Charles didn't wait for William's blessing. He didn't wait for a perfect resolution between his sons. He reportedly just made the call, arranged the cover, hosted the lunch, opened Highgrove's doors, because 4 years without his grandchildren was already 3 years too many. That's the version of this family worth rooting for. Not one where reconciliation requires unanimous consent from every aggrieved party before it's allowed to happen, but one where a grandfather decides that loving his grandchildren doesn't require his other son's permission. So that's really the test coming this Christmas. Not whether Harry and Meghan want to come home. By every indication, they clearly do. The test is whether the rest of this family and the institution behind them can let a father see his grandchildren without turning it into a referendum on who was right years ago. Drop your take in the comments, because I read every single one. Do you think William's reported opposition is really about protecting his own healing, or protecting the institution's version of events? And should Charles have waited for approval at all, or was he right to open that door on his own terms? If this one hit you the way it hit me, do me a favour. Hit like, send it to someone who needs to see it, and if you're not already part of this community, subscribe, because we're not done covering this story before Christmas actually gets here. Until next time, squaddies, take care of each other.